How is Elon so productive? Have you ever deconstructed this?
He has an operating method that he's developed that I would say is very unusual by modern standards. Actually, I'm not aware of another current CEO who operates the way that he does. And I think probably the single biggest kind of question in all of business right now is why don't more CEOs operate the way that he does? And if you go back in history, you find characters more like him. And so, especially like the industrialists of the late 1800s, early 1900s, people like Henry Ford or Andrew Carnegie or Thomas Watson, who built IBM. The top line thing is just this incredible devotion from the leader of the company to fully, deeply understand what the company does and to be, completely knowledgeable about every aspect of it and to be in the trenches and talking directly to the people who do the work, deeply understanding the issues and, being the lead problem solver in the organization. And basically what Elon does is he shows up every week at each of his companies. He identifies the biggest problem that the company's having that week and he fixes it, right? And then he does that every week for 52 weeks in a row. And then each of his companies has solved the 52 biggest problems that year, like in that year. And, most other large companies are still having the planning meeting for the pre-planning meeting, for the board meeting, for the presentation, for the this, for the, with the compliance review and the legal review. And so it's this level of both incredible intellectual capability coupled with incredible force of personality, moral authority, execution capability, focus on fundamentals that is just really amazing to watch. And then, by the way, the side effect of it is he attracts, many of the best people in the world to work with him. Because if you work with Elon, the expectations are through the roof in terms of your level of performance. And he is going to know who you are and he is going to know what you've done. And he's going to know what you've done this week. And he's going to know if you're underperforming. And he may fire you in the meeting if you're not carrying your weight. But if you are as committed to the company as he is and working hard, many people who have worked for him say that they had the best experience of their lives when they were working for him.
There may be some challenges in learning when to delegate, when to hand off tasks. That must be a challenge, delineating between what is my problem to solve and what is somebody else's.
Yeah, so I would say most leaders, like most CEOs we work with, have exactly that problem for exactly the reasons you described. I think the Elon method is a little bit different. He actually delegates almost everything. He's not involved in most of the things that his companies are doing. He's involved in the thing that is the biggest problem right now until that thing is fixed. And then he doesn't have to be involved in it anymore. And then he can go focus on the next thing that's the biggest problem for that company right now. For example, in manufacturing, there's this concept of the bottleneck, right? And so in any manufacturing chain, there's always some bottleneck. There's always something that is keeping the manufacturing line from running the way that it's supposed to. And sometimes the bottleneck is at the beginning of the process. It's we can't get enough raw material. Sometimes the bottleneck is at the end of the process. We don't have enough warehouses for the finished product, or the bottleneck might be somewhere in the middle. And if you run a manufacturing company, there's always a bottleneck. Whatever the bottleneck is holding everything up. The job number one is to remove that bottleneck and get everything flowing again. And I think he basically has universalized that concept. And he basically looks at every company like it's, some sort of conceptual assembly line, sometimes a literal assembly line, making cars and rockets. And basically any given week, there's a bottleneck. There's guaranteed to be the main bottleneck. There's going to be one thing that's going to be the thing that's holding people back. And so the answer to your question, the resolution of the paradox is I'm going to micromanage the solution of that. I don't need to manage everything else because everything else by definition is running better than that, right? And so I can go focus on that. The other part of it is so compelling, and this is where I think a lot of, especially non-technical CEOs would really struggle to implement the method, is he really, when he identifies the bottleneck, he goes and he talks to the line engineers who understand the technical nature of the bottleneck. And if that's people on a manufacturing line, he's talking to people directly on the line. Or if that's people in a software development group, he's talking to the people actually writing the code. Right. So he's not asking the VP of engineering to ask the director of engineering to ask the manager to ask the individual contributor to write a report for, that's to be reviewed in 3 weeks. He doesn't do that. What he does is he goes and personally finds the engineer who actually has the knowledge about the thing. And then he sits in the room with that engineer and fixes the problem with them. And again, this is why he inspires such incredible loyalty from the especially the technical people who he works with, which is they're just wow, if I'm up against a problem I don't know how to solve, freaking Elon Musk is going to show up in his Gulfstream and he's going to sit with me overnight in front of the keyboard or in front of the manufacturing line, and he's going to help me figure this out. And this is the thing. It's okay, you're a normal CEO running a normal company. How can you possibly compete with that?
What are the other reasons that CEOs of similar companies or comparable companies don't do that? Technical understanding, I get that you need to be able to get your hands dirty from a specificity perspective, but what else?
More generally, it's just the way that management is taught, and most classically in the form of something like a Harvard Business School or Stanford Business School. It's basically taught. It's basically management as it was sort of developed and implemented, I would say, in like the 1950s, 60s, 70s. It was sort of the so-called scientific school of management. And so it's basically management as a generic skill that you can apply to any industry. And, you can manage a soup company or and they're kind of all the same, and it kind of doesn't matter what they do. And there's a common set of management practices. And it has, is a lot to do. It's, process. It's, how do you manage the balance sheet? How do you set the review schedule for the meetings? How do you do compliance? How do you hire and motivate executives? How do you resolve interpersonal conflicts? Like all these like general business skills. And by the way, those general business skills are, very useful in lots of contexts. It's just that training gives you none of what you need to go do what Elon does. And then Elon I would say he pushes it as far as he can, and not doing all the stuff that you're classically trained to do, so that he can spend all of his time doing the things that only he can do, which it turns out has this just incredible, catalytic multiplicative effect where his companies are, so just incredibly amazing.